Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. My name is Angel Parson, and I'm the program coordinator at the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor National Heritage Area. And it is my pleasure tonight to welcome you all to our first session, our first Gullah Language Summer School Series session with Dr. Jessica Berry. Dr. Jessica Berry is an author, educator, and Gullah Geechee language expert hailing from the major city of Hughie, South Carolina. And we are so grateful to have her here with us today. We are not going to prolong the time, but as just as a point of housekeeping, you will find right now that everyone is muted, and that's just to help minimize the distractions so that Dr. Berry will be able to present with no issues, no distractions, and that everyone will be able to fully understand and engage in what she's saying. But have no fear, there are multiple times throughout her presentation where you will be able to ask questions. And so as those questions are kind of coming to you throughout her presentation, feel free to drop those questions in the chat. And what I'll do is I will take those questions and we'll kind of put them to the side. And when the time comes, I will go ahead and read out your question and share your name, and we will unmute everybody at that time so that you all will be able to engage with her. We are so excited for you to be here. You may all be in gallery view right now. So if you are in gallery view, we want you to go up to your the right-hand side of the screen to view. Click on that and make sure that you get into speaker view so that you can see the presentation and see Dr. Berry in full. Also, as we are going about the question and answer portion, if somebody asks a question and Dr. Berry gives an answer and that kind of awakens something in you, feel free to hit the reactions tab at the bottom of your screen. It'll be a smiley face with a plus sign, and you can just do the raise your hand icon, and we'll try to do our best to call on you. We know that there may be tons of questions that come from this presentation, and we will do our best to answer all of them, but just due to the time, we may not hit them all. So if we missed your question, drop it in the chat. I'll send all of those questions over to Dr. Berry, and hopefully in one of the upcoming sessions, she can answer. So without further ado, Dr. Berry.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much, Angel, for that amazing presentation. I am very excited to be here today. Let me get my presentation up for us so that we can get started. I am grateful for everyone who took out their afternoon to join me for the first session in the Gullah Language Summer Series with the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor, titled Tackling Turner. Lorenzo Dow Turner is such an important figure in Gullah Studies, past and present, that I thought before we get into any deep conversations about Gullah language, vocabulary, grammar structure, implications on education, any of those phenomenal things that I love to talk about, I thought we should spend some time diving into Turner, his background, his accomplishments, and sort of what he's contributed to what we now know our Gullah Studies. Before I move on to the next slide, I have to say thank you to the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor Commission for inviting me to do this series this summer. It's always a privilege and an honor to partner with the agency doing the work in the corridor. Angel mentioned I'm a Hughie native. I'm a Berkeley County School District graduate, Winthrop University graduate, South Carolina State University graduate, and Louisiana State University graduate. I like to share where I went to school because there may be some fellow colleagues in the audience who went to school with me or attended these universities. If you did, drop that in the chat. Let me know if you went to any of these universities. In this picture, you'll see a couple of my mentors, Dr. Harriet Gregg, Dr. Gwendolyn Wilson. They used to chair the speech department at South Carolina State University. So each time I present, I like to just share some people who were influential in my matriculation through higher ed and through school. So I'm an educator. I've taught higher ed for 8 years. Right now I'm serving as a higher ed professional at the state level. I'm a wife, mom, and a musician, author. You can see my book up in the corner, the Little Gullah Geechee book, A Guide for the Kamya. It is available online on Amazon if you would like to purchase a copy. So today we're going to cover a few things. We only have an hour, and if anybody knows me and has come to a presentation with me, you know I can talk. So I'm going to try to get through all of these things. We're going to cover a couple of things. Number one, who's Turner? Why was his work significant? We're going to explore a little bit of his work and talk about what he found. And then also, how did his work shape current trends in the scholar of linguistics? So Lorenzo Dow Turner, he is the father of Gullah Studies. Angel should have also sent you guys in an email prior to this. I think she sent it a handout for you. Some of the blanks are in there. You can fill those in as we go. But he's known as the father of Gullah Studies. Margaret Wade Lewis wrote a biography of his background. She was a scholar herself and had used his work. His work influenced her work in Gullah. And so she took the time to document his life from childhood all the way through his death in 1972. But she coined him the father of Gullah Studies. And I think that that was a very, very accurate statement about who he was. So he was an African-American linguist. He published this seminal text called Africanisms in the Gullah dialect in 1949. And this book serves as the foundation for scholarship on the African diaspora, and particularly Gullah dialect and their connection to African grammar and African languages. It provided evidence of significant cultural and linguistic retention of African languages and cultures among African Americans. And this was significant for a couple of reasons. Up until this point, until this book was published, the conversations around Gullah were that it was broken English, that it didn't have structure, didn't have context. And so him publishing a book, writing it down, breaking it down, and making the connections to Africa was groundbreaking in all of the scholarly work that was being done. So to further who he was, I wanted to dig into Margaret's text to give a little bit of context to who he was. He was born in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, and subsequently moved to Rockville, Maryland. What I found interesting as I was reading through the narrative was that his father was born free, but his mother was born enslaved. And his mother was considered a mulatto. She was of mixed race. Her father was white and her mother was Black. And I thought that was interesting because as you go through Margaret's text, she mentions that several times and talks about how the mix of white and Black sort of contributed to Lorenzo's stature, how he looked, and how he was sort of able to navigate all of the different academic spaces that he inhabited across his career. So who's Turner? Now, every time I see this picture, I'm like, oh my gosh, he looks so mean. But in the text, for the people who knew him, they talked about him being really tall, like 6'2", and soft-spoken, very thin, and extremely smart. One thing I found interesting as well is that he did not attend college until he was 20 years old because he needed to work to save funds. His parents had split up and he was responsible for helping his mom take care of the house with his two brothers. And so working was his way of saving, but he always knew that he was going to go back to college. So one of the ways that he made money was he worked at a port, he worked on trains. But interestingly, he also played baseball. And I thought that was a very neat fact. He played for the Commonwealth Giants baseball team, and it was comprised of Black young men on Commonwealth Steamboat of the Fall River, Massachusetts Steamboat Line. So he made money through baseball and paid for his education while taking care of his mother. I mean, if that doesn't speak to his ambition and eagerness to learn, I don't know what does. And I think it also transcends his time, thinking back into the 1920s and 30s. For him to be able to do this, I think was really very unique. So a little bit more about his educational trajectory. So he attended Howard University in 1910 and earned a bachelor's in English. He attended Harvard Graduate School of Arts and Sciences in 1917 and earned a master's of arts in English. It said that when he was applying to Harvard, he took a relaxed approach. In his letter, he made comments like, if you think that I'm a good fit, I'd love to attend. They said it was just very, very relaxed about his background. And then he received the letter saying that he was accepted Harvard Graduate School of Arts and Sciences in 1917, which was a huge accomplishment because Harvard, as you know, historically didn't accept a lot of African-American students. So for him to be able to go to Harvard and study English was important. Now, as you can see, then he went on to attend the University of Chicago from 1919 to 1926, earning a PhD in English. All of his degrees were in English, and the rationale that he gave was that his mom and his family told him that when you get a degree in English, you can kind of go anywhere from there. You can create a ginormous playing field for career pathways, and that a lot of people were going to school to be teachers and things like that. But his mom said, we need a doctor, we need a lawyer in our family. And so there was a lot of commentary in the text about sort of his decision and why he kept on this path toward earning all of his degrees in English. And I think it boded well for him. Although he was a second generation college student. I thought that was another interesting fact at a time when most African Americans were only receiving up to a fourth grade education. His father graduated from Howard University in 1877. So Lorenzo Dow Turner didn't come from a home where no one went to college. So he always knew, even though it took him a little bit more time, he didn't start until he was 20. He always knew that college was in his pathway. And in particular, Howard University, if we go back, you can see that Howard was always there in that trajectory. He had several notable achievements in his career. In 1913, he joined the Howard Debate Club. He was the manager of their baseball team. He was the class president, advisory council member. He joined Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. And for those of my South Carolina people in here, he spent summers teaching at South Carolina State University. And I think that was really interesting. And I always knew that, but it was really nice as I refreshed and read the text again to remember that Lorenzo Dow Turner, the father of Gullah Studies, actually taught in South Carolina at South Carolina State University, HBCU, very, very close to the Gullah Geechee corridor. In 1917 through 1928, he served as the head of the Department of English at Howard. So he went back and served as the department chair in the very department that educated him. And I'm sure there are several of us who have those similar stories. I know I do. I went back and served as department chair of speech pathology at South Carolina State as well. So it's sort of in our blood that we go, we get educated, and we come back and serve the communities that served us. He also served as department chair of English at Fisk University. And at the same time, dually for 2 years, he also served as the chair of African Studies. He spent a lot of time as well later as a Fulbright scholar in Africa and mastered several of the African languages that he went on to study and document there in his book, Africanisms in the Gullah Language. So as you can see, Lorenzo Dow Turner is a superstar for his time and for his age. He was well ahead. So I want us to stop and think just a little bit. What resonates with you about Turner's life story? And you can drop that in the chat, or you can raise your hand if you'd like to share. Is there something that resonates with you about what I've shared with you about Turner's background and Turner's life story?
Now, I've unmuted everyone, so feel free to unmute yourselves and share.
Angie Neal says, love that he's connected to SCSU and taught there. Absolutely, absolutely. That's so exciting. And I wonder what can be done to sort of recognize that contribution right here in South Carolina, giving back to the ones who educated and loved him. Thank you, Corey. Absolutely. Sierra, former English major here. Absolutely. I don't know. You guys are special. You English majors are special. Going back and giving back to his community. Yes. That he was a second generation college student. Yes. Isn't that surprising? I mean, when you think back, this was, and I'm going to kind of go back in my presentation just a little bit so we can have a little bit of context for this. 1890, he died in 1972, but he was a second gen college student. I'm first gen. I was born in 1986. So the fact that he had this kind of opportunity in this time was already beating a lot of odds that African-American people didn't have the opportunity to beat. The family importance to him, absolutely, is beautiful. Thank you, Jean. I hope I'm saying your name right. That's great. His educational accomplishments are impressive, pre-civil rights, and there's so many barriers, absolutely. And he was able to just sort of seamlessly like float through and overcome a lot of those. Thank you guys for just taking a moment to reflect. I think it's important that we kind of honor those people who were able to overcome odds and set the groundwork for those of us who continue in this scholarly work. All right, so let's keep going. This section is going to be a bit brief. If you are interested in a more in-depth dive into the background of like what Gullah is, where Gullah came from, culture, history, all of those things, food, Angel will be able to share with you a link to a session that I did last year in July, where I went through all of it, top to bottom, what Gullah is, where we come from, who we are, and all of those things. But today, I just wanted to say, when we're talking about the history of Gullah, I always have to say that it's trifold. We're people, we're culture, and we're language. So when you hear the words Gullah Geechee, understand that it's not just the language, but we hold that identity, and then we do certain things that make our culture extremely unique compared to other African-American cultures that still exist across the diaspora. The Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor, it starts at the shoreline and goes 30 miles inland, includes Jasper County, Charleston County, Berkeley County, Horry County, Georgetown County. And interestingly, Dr. Lorenzo Dow Turner, in order to write the book, Africanisms in the Gullah Language and Gullah Dialect, he spent a lot of time in the corridor. In particular, he spent most of his time on the islands, Johns Island and Wamala Island. And he, before he even started writing the book, he spent a lot of time getting to know the people on the islands. One thing about us in our Gullah community, as you can see, the corridor isn't huge, right? There's not a lot of depth to the corridor. 30 miles is what we got. And Gullah culture is insular. So if you don't speak the language or you're not from the culture, we tend to, I guess, hide or not as freely use our language and open up to our cultural norms to outsiders. And so Turner, being the English major that he was and the linguist that he was and the researcher that he was, recognized that it was going to be more important that he build relationships with those on the islands before he had any opportunity to record them, transcribe their language samples, ask any kind of questions about what they know or what they remember from Africa. And that bode him very, very well, because once he got to the point of being able to record what he was hearing, people were willing because he had spent the time to get to know them. And so I think the lesson there in this piece is, if you're interested in studying Gullah in a firsthand type of way, coming into the community, learning about who we are, it's those relationships that are going to open the doors for Gullah speakers to communicate freely and have open dialogue about our culture. And here's why. Gullah was born out of isolation. So during the 1920s, that's around the first time that bridges were being built to bring for access for Gullah Geechee people to the mainland. And so up until that point, they were very, very isolated. And even when Lorenzo Dow Turner was doing his work on the islands, he recorded that it was very isolated. People did not leave the islands often. He said they didn't have to because they pretty much had what they needed. They were growing rice. They were able to plant gardens. You know, they had food. They had family. They had a lot of what they needed in the island spaces. And because of that, they were able to retain much from Africa that Lorenzo Dow Turner was able to document in his text. So in this book, he was able to identify more than 4,000 words, this dialect that trace lexical descent from several languages in West and Central Africa. Up until this point, people had said Gullah was broken English, that we were just messing up the English language. And then here comes Lorenzo Dow Turner with a bachelor's in English, a master's in English, a PhD in English, had attended Howard and Harvard and the University of Chicago. And this man is saying, absolutely not. There's nothing broken about it. These people are using trace lexical structures that derive directly from African languages that have existed since the beginning of time. This was groundbreaking. What he found was that 30% of the enslaved came from what is now considered Angola, from where some scholars say the term Gola is derived. And the language that they spoke there was Kimbandu. 23% from Sierra Leone, where they spoke Creole. And scholars today have made many connections, a lot of connections to the Sierra Leone Creole, and have said that when they went to Sierra Leone, that the language, the Creole language there was almost identical to Gullah, and they could understand them very well, which I think is beautiful. 20% of the enslaved are from what is now Senegal and Gambia. 13% is from what is now Ghana, and they speak the Twi language. 5% is from what is now coastal Nigeria, Madagascar, and Mozambique. So as you can see, a huge list of where the enslaved Africans came from, and in each place, there was a different African language tied to these tribes and to these people. And so all of these languages mixed together because all of these people were strategically separated and then put together on different plantations to eradicate their ability to communicate, when really what it did, because they were so brilliant, they took all pieces from all of these different languages and created a new variety, a Creole variety that we know of as Gullah. And we know that because of Turner's work, right? So a couple other languages that he noted in the text that were spoken were Efik, spoken in the southern Nigeria state, the Fante, spoken in Ghana as well, U, spoken in Ghana, Togo, and parts of Benin. And then there's Yoruba, Mandingo, and many other African languages. If you pour through the pages, and I would encourage you, try to order that book if you can. It's a gem to have. But he breaks it down into the connections between these languages and Gullah. So like I said, I love this meme. It's been out for a little while, but somebody said Gullah is broken English, and before they could finish, they said, boy, shut up. Boy, shut up. Because we're not saying that anymore. Gullah is not broken English. Turner in 1949 set the tone for how we discuss Gullah. And what he did that I think was really unique, and you'll see that I did this here, transcribed Gullah Geechee phonetically. Phonetic transcription is something that's used among linguists and speech language pathologists. And what it does is it transcribes language back into the sound as you hear the sound, and it gives you the most authentic transcription of what's being heard. And so Turner painstakingly transcribed all of these language samples, those 4,000 words, he was able to transcribe and compare to the multiple African languages that he identified that Gullah came from. So he found phonemic, lexical, and syntactic similarities between Gullah and several West African languages. And so we're going to look at a few of those similarities. First, let's take a look at some lexical similarities. A couple words I'm going to bring in. First is Amin. Gullah people intersperse sort of these Amin instead of Amen. Amen is Arabic version of Hebrew Amen, which has been exported to and domesticated in English to mean so be it, in both Hebrew and Arabic. So the Gullah use of the Arabic version of the word doing prayers, because that was the version that was passed on to them by their West African Muslim ancestors. So he was able to document that word in that pronunciation directly from West African ancestors. Then it's Bakra, this Gullah word, and I'm going to pause real quick to say Gullah does not have standard written variety. Gullah is traditionally an orally spoken variety. So you will see certain words written in various ways. You will see this across my presentation, and you'll also see it in anything that you see people translating into Gullah. The most standardized written Gullah right now is the New Testament that was transcribed over several years into Gullah. But when you see people writing it for publications of blogs or articles, unless they're writing the phonetic transcription, the sound transcription, then the words are going to be written differently depending on who's writing them. So I wanted to note that just in case anybody had questions about, well, why isn't it written this way? But Bakra is the Gullah word for white man, and it's derived from Mbakara, the Akang Ifik Ibibo word for white man. And so Turner said Igbo people also use Mbakara to mean white man, okay? And that some people say that's not all the way accurate, but this is what he noted in his text. Another word that he noted was bidi bidi, and it means small bird or small chicken in Gullah. And according to Turner, it derives from Congo, Niger-Congo language spoken in Angola. And so I used to hear my granny say that bidi bidi, and I didn't know that that was directly related to Congo or Niger-Congo or African language. I just knew, well, that's what my granny called them, so I called them a little bitty bitty. That was it. So it's interesting as you dive into Gullah language studies, because of the work that Turner did, to be able to know and to understand that the words I heard my grandma and my aunties and them saying when I was growing up were directly from Africa. It's actually pretty nice. So here on this bottom, I put a picture there of my auntie who she's gone on to be with the Lord, but that's my auntie. She was able to be with me at my wedding, and we call her Aunt Dada. And I just thought we call her Aunt Dada, that's it. But as you know, a Gullah scholar and digging into what these words mean, what I learned was that Turner found parallels for Dada in Gullah, interchangeably meaning mother, nurse, or an elderly woman. And so Turner found parallels for these words in the Yu language spoken in Togo, Ghana, and Benin Republic, where da and dada means, or dada means mother or elder sister. And so I thought that was interesting because dada was my grandma's elder sister, and her nickname was Dada. And then my grandma's nickname was Tita. And we're going to talk about Tita and what Tita means in just a little bit. But I wanted to share that because I think that's special as I reflect on the words that I heard and the people, those lexical things that now I know parallel what is found in Africa. A couple words that you may have heard previously or heard before and probably didn't know that they were Gullah was yam, from the Mandingo yam or yambi, and the Ghana yamu. So yam that we talk about for Thanksgiving and holidays, that is not an English word. That is an African word brought in through the Gullah language that has now become a word that everybody uses in traditional English language. Another word, to tote. Tote means to carry, and that is also a word that Turner notes comes from, he directly correlates to some of the African languages. All right, so we talked about some of the lexical things, and so now I'm going to move a little bit to names, because Turner spent a good deal of his text going through names of the people, because remember, again, I said he spent a lot of time getting to know these people and know who they are. And what he noted was that many of them had something called a basket name. And basket names are their African names. But what he also noted that I thought was interesting, and I took just this one line from the text. He said, many Gullah were not aware of their name connections to Africa. So they knew they had a basket name and then they had their regular name, but they didn't know that the basket name was a direct tie back to Africa. Some of the basket names that he documented in the book were Ade, Adebisi, Adebiyi, Adekule, Ndunkule, Ndeni, Nduele, Adu, Adosu, Angachu, Akarahe, and some of them have meanings, Akau and Alafia. Now, I know some of you also have heard that word probably before in the song Funga Alafia, Ashe, Ashe. And so some people also had that as a basket name. He noted specifically some of the names and where their origins were, like Idris is a Yoruba name. And I know many of us are familiar with Idris Elba. Yes, that name is a Yoruba African name. Then we have Fatuma, Fatu, and Fatima, Fatimata. These are all Mandingo, Wolof names. Then we have names like Jumeir, and that name is now regarded as a Fulani name. And I don't know if you guys know this, but have you ever met anybody now? Like, I've met a couple young boys recently named Jameer or Jameer. And I always wondered, like, oh, that's such a unique, I wonder where people got these names from. But as you go back and you kind of look at the names that Turner was documenting, people are still naming their kids these names now that are directly tied to African names. And just like back then, they probably don't even know the true origins of those names. One other name, Jabril, which is Nigerian. And I literally just met somebody named Jabril and I was like, huh, interesting. And Abba, which is a male name in Gullah and was the name of a girl born on Thursday among the Fante people of present-day Ghana. So he talked a little bit about the names and some of the names sort of being neutral. And so Abba was one of those names that was neutral for boy and girl. And it was really only used in the name of a girl if they were born on a Thursday. And so I thought the whole chapter and section in that book about names was really, really unique. So let's stop and think for just a very quick minute. What similarities exist between Gullah basket names and nicknames used across the African diaspora? Anybody think about or want to share any nicknames? I shared some from me, my Aunt Dada, and my grandma was Tita. And I got a few more. Baba is my uncle. Anybody got a Baba in their family? Bobo, yeah. We got a lot of Bobos around, Bobos and Babas. And he had direct connection to Nigerian Baba for brother, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. Oh, Akarahe is food in Bahia, Brazil. Nice. Beautiful connection there. And we do know that during the transatlantic slave trade, the enslaved Africans didn't just come straight to Charleston. I mean, they were dispersed across, and I am sure some were there in Brazil, so there may be some connections. So Cameron says, my great-grandmother was a midwife and they call her Dada. Wow. Jean says, my father calls me Zola, and that's related to Kuzola. Wow, to love in Kumbandu. That's beautiful. Beautiful. Okay, Jean is from Brazil too. Fantastic. Thank you guys for sharing. Anyone else before I move? Akaraje is the same as the Nigerian Akara. Beautiful. Thank you. Y'all are teaching me something. TT, Oh yes, TT. I got a couple cousins that we call TT. Anybody know sort of like the meaning for TT or how it's used, or want to share how it's kind of used in your familial context? Aunt. Okay. Aunts. Good. Okay. Isn't that nice how we have like one word the same across multiple families and how we use them to represent, and knowing now that we called Genesis, we call my aunt TT. Wow. See there? That's awesome. Y'all are phenomenal. Oh, my dad nicknamed me Baba. He grew up in Wamala. How great is that? So you have a basket name, Shimona. You have a basket name, Baba. And you know, my daddy nicknamed me Dad and Daddy. And so that's my basket name is Dad. Oh, great grandmama named me Lo Uman, and she was from Georgia. Great. Lo Uman. Yes, right. I know a lady right down the street here. We call her Lo Gal. That's her basket name, Lo Gal. And everybody calls her that. She has a real name, but everybody knows about her basket name, Lo Gal. So hey, Lo Uman, Alyssa. That's great. That's so great. Beautiful, guys. Thank you guys for sharing. I love to engage. I don't want to just be a talking head because that's kind of boring. So thank you guys for indulging. And I hope those of you who don't have basket names can at least still maybe think about the nicknames that exist in your family and how some of those nicknames could also potentially be heritage names from your ancestors. So I pulled this directly from, and I don't like to pull stuff directly from the text, but I thought this was a beautiful display that I just didn't want to mess with. But on the left, he has some Gullah personal names that he lists. And then on the right, he highlights the West African words that are exactly the same as the names to the left. So lelo, in the West African word lelo means tasteless or insipid. Then you have lelu, okay, is a raft. Lelula, lamami is a turban. Then you see in the name where they took away the N, so it's lambi, but in the West African word, it's lambi, a cook, okay? And so I just thought, I'm not going to read all of them, but I'll just leave it on the screen here for a minute for you to kind of look at. But I thought it was really nice how he was able to take the names of the people that he met on the islands and then look over into the African vernacular vocabulary and find direct correlations to the African names of the people on the islands to the African words. And I just thought that was really, really beautiful. And I think about all of the work that it took to do this. And I think it just really, really speaks nicely to Turner and who he was as a scholar. Okay, so let's go a little bit into the people. And when I say the people, it's the people who were informants for Lorenzo Dow Turner's work. These be people. There were 21 principal Gullah informants. He talks about them as not having much formal education. They were all on Wamala and John's Island, relatively isolated. They didn't necessarily leave the island very much. In the text, it talks about the men leaving the islands a little bit more to work and then coming back, but the women in particular staying on the island and having a lot of African retentions. He recalled songs and texts, and Turner was able to tie back these songs to the Vai and Mende people. No one, and this was also very striking to me, but he noted in the text that no one had knowledge of an African language. So even though when they were talking, he would hear them literally using African language as they spoke, But when he asked them after building relationship, like, well, do you know that what you're saying or this song you're singing is a Mende song or a Vai song? Or they didn't know. They just knew, well, that's what Meme taught me. That's what Pepe taught me. And that's what I know. And so I thought it was very neat that he made a point to say, these people didn't know of their African language. And the parallel to that, to current Gullah studies, current Gullah identity, is that ever since the time Turner was capturing these sounds and words back in the 1930s and 40s to 2023, where we sit right now, there are still people who don't know that they are Gullah and that they have that identity, that they speak that language, and that that language is not broken English, and that it is from a mixture of English and African, various African languages. So even still, from 1949 to now, there's still some divide in our willingness and knowledge of the beautiful language that we do carry. So I want us to take a listen to Diana Brown, July 6, 1932. This was recorded on Edisto Island, and it's a sample prayer from Miss Diana that we're going to listen to. And the reason why I wanted us to, why I want us to, and why we're going to listen to Diana is because Diana was also the person that I used her language, her sample, her transcript, with Turner's transcription of Diana's recollection of the earthquake in my Gullah Studies, the dissertation that I wrote. So we're going to listen real quick, just for your reference. This is listed on your reference sheet, but Indiana University Bloomington has the Dow Turner collections is available online, and they talk a little bit about who he is. But I want you to hear Diana Brown.
Oh, I did it good. Join the kingdom for you. Oh, yes. And how of God. When that on to the Tiger, attention. Children, no. But I ask you, Jesus, to take care of me and take care of the soul. For the last morning, when I come down to joy. I want you, mother, for thee, to be head and one beautiful sick. For the last morning, oh, stand to the death side. Oh, God, this morning. And Lord, when you see Diana done knock on side to side on everything. No mother, no father, no brother, no sister. I ask you, Jesus, for being my mother and being my father. For the last morning, oh, God, stand to me with my dear family. Yeah, you the only one I can look up on as a boy. And you is my mother, you is my father. You got and all I got for 10 pounds. Oh, God, and some charge of me once more time. On the road, up in the field, up to the fireside. Oh, God to the well. Lord, I ask you tonight, some charge of my house. First I leave, bring them up, and peace, and love, till I turn back to him. And
So I'll pause there, and as you can hear, it's crackly because it's definitely a very old recording. It was recording July 6, 1932, but you can definitely hear her Gullah and her expression, and it's beautiful. I put the link in the chat so that you can go back and listen to it when we're done and probably hear it a little clearer. And then I want us to just listen very quickly to a Mende song by Amelia Dawley. This was recorded in 1933 in Harris Neck, Georgia. And I want us to hear it just because in his text, he talks a lot about hearing the songs. And then when he went to Africa, he heard the same songs. And that's how he was able to connect the two, that people in Georgia, South Carolina, on the Sea Islands were singing African songs, but they didn't know.
Ashes and gold and higher bunga, let the ashes and gold run in between. Ashes and gold and higher bunga, let the ashes and gold run in between. I walk on the moon and somebody out in the lake. One day I walk on the moon and somebody out in the lake. Ashes and gold and higher bunga, ashes and gold run in between.
All right, we will pause right there. But I hope you guys enjoyed hearing those samples. I thought they were neat to just kind of hear from Turner's perspective what he was hearing on the island. But Diana Brown shared the story of the earthquake of 1896. She was a resident of Edisto Island. Her transcript contains 86 utterances. And for my dissertation, I was looking at the B structure, is, are, was, were, and am. In the field of speech language pathology, we know that those structures are typically used to indicate impairment in children. And so I was very interested in, first of all, were people back in the 30s from these transcripts using B forms, and how often were they using them, how frequent were they, and were children still using the same forms as Diana Brown that she was using back in 1939, helping to make the case for the modern use of Gullah. So what I found was that there were 20 Gullah B forms that included duh for is, 0 were, meaning were was omitted, and been for was were. So an utterance would say, instead of she was home, it would have said she been home, and instead of saying we were going, it would have said we been going. Okay, so there were 20 occurrences of that in Diana Brown's transcript of 86 utterances. The other speaker was the first earthquake, 1886, was told by Rosina Cohen, also from Edisto Island. Turner captured this and documented on page 268 of his text. Rosina's story contained 59 utterances and 22 different Gullah B forms. Her B forms included 0, is, and are. So instead of saying she is, it would have been she going. Instead of we are, is we going. Full and contracted is, so sometimes is was there and sometimes it was contracted. Duh for are, so instead of we are going to the store, we to go to the store. Duh for was as well, so instead of we, she was happy, she to happy, and instead of am, I to happy. And been for were. Rosina Cohen's Gullah B forms and Turner's glosses of their utterances are presented on the latter table that I will go through. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here because we are right at the wrapping up time and I want to be able to answer questions. But what I wanted to show you here was a breakdown of the phonetic transcription. You'll see here of the samples from Turner. And so these were his phonetic transcriptions. And then he had a gloss. And so what that means is he transcribed it phonetically, and then he glossed what this is saying in Gullah. So the first one is, that is the earthquake. And he glossed it as, that is the earthquake. And so then I came and glossed it for how a 5 or 6 year old would say it now, where they would say, that's the earthquake, or that the earthquake. And even going back, looking at my own work, I should have put that, D-A-T, instead of that, because still Gullah speakers now substitute the duh for the TH consistently. And another one that is notable is the duh for was. He said, but now know the August, but I know it was August. But I know it been August, but I know it been August, which the alternative gloss is more likely how I would say it now, but I know it been August. And so I wanted to show in this that Turner's glosses and the glosses that I made for modern Gullah, which would have been in 2017, weren't that different, helping to make the case that what Turner documented in 1939 still very, very present in 2017 and still maintain much of the structure that he documented in 1939, which helps us to demonstrate Gullah is not dead, is not dying. It's changing. There are little small changes that are happening, but I think that the linguists and the speech pathologists and the educators can all pay attention to, hey, if these structures from 1939 are still present in 2023, what does that mean for the future of Gullah and for accommodations that may be needed for Gullah speakers? That's a different presentation for a different day, but I did want to share that. And so I made a comparison of the overt marking of child Gullah Geechee and adult Gullah Geechee. And interestingly, what I found was, and when I say overt marking, what I mean there is they actually use these forms. They didn't cut them out, didn't leave them out. How many times did they use these forms when they were technically overt or should have been marked in mainstream English? So Rosina and Diana they never use am. They just didn't use that. They use is 46%, was, were, they use 82, been 71, and duh 40%. What I found in my sample, which my sample were 19 5-year-old Gullah Geechee speakers from across the corridor, from Hughie to North Charleston to downtown Charleston to Mount Pleasant. And so they were using am at 69%, is at 76%, are at 48%, was pretty high at 89%. Been they only used 12%, and duh at 0.6%. So what we're seeing is that they're still using these forms, and in some cases at a higher rate than what was being used in 1949 when Turner documented his work. So let's stop and think. Gullah grammar structures are persistent. Diana and Rosina's structures were present in 5-year-old children in 2017. How does that resonate with you? What does that mean? If you want to share it in the chat for the future of Gullah as a language. Persistence, yes. Still alive, carry on, still spoken in my family. Yes, yes, yes. My mom actually just started saying she Gullah Geechee. Like I don't know, she was a little resistant to saying that. And I think that's interesting across the culture, that some generations are like hesitant, and then there's some of us that are like, yeah, I'm Gullah Geechee. How the change is happening and continuing to progress, I think is interesting. Wait, did I just see Anita Prather? Hi. Oh my gosh. Okay, wait, I'm just fangirling out just a minute. Sorry, guys. I'm really excited. Perseverance, beautiful. Sankofa. Yes, it will continue to flourish. I think in having conversations like this, bold conversations, where we get to talk about Gullah in such a scholarly way and in a way that's reflective of kind of like progressiveness of who we are. I think it's really, really great. So I'm going to try to speed through the rest of this because I want to just make a couple last points. But Mafweni, Salakoko Mafweni is a scholar who kind of picked up the mantle and has done a lot of studies on Gullah. But he and Gillum in 19 published a paper, and I thought some of what they shared was relevant here today. They took Gullah and said, we take all we people and put them in a home. Translation, we take our old people, leave them in a home. And compare that to Creole, which is that language out of Sierra Leone. And they say, take it left, give them. Take, leave them. Take some, eat some, and leave the rest for them. But interesting, they were showing the direct comparison to how we would say we take our old people, put them in a home, and how they have some of the similar features in Creole languages. So I'll show you a couple other things that they highlighted in their work. Was in Gullah, we see a loss of the final consonant. So in our language, we would not say last, because that ST blend doesn't exist in the Creole, Yoruba, Mende, Twa. None of those languages have that ST blend. So it's last. And the same thing on like gi. So give me something. And then the duh for TH consistently. Dat, de, dem. That TH blend also doesn't exist in some of those African languages. So just to go over a few Gullah words as we wrap up today, you have some on your sheet. And again, remember I talked about Gullah has no standard written form. So I tried to put some of the variations that I see across some of the written literature that is out there. So the first word one of the words that Turner noted a direct relation to African vernacular was ana, meaning you. Ben, okay, for Ben. Day clean, morning or broad daylight. We talked about Baba or brother, okay? And we see Baba across, and we see Baba across the African diaspora in relation to brother. Then we say Dasha for this here, Evening, and Evelyn. So in Hugie, our elderly people, older people, they would say good evening and put the L in it. But I also hear people replace the V for a B. That's a typical grammar structure substitution. So evening, okay? Then you got Umin, and we saw somebody in the chat say her nickname was Lo Umin. So Umin, directly related to African. And then something else we see, the substitution for V is either going to be a B or a W if it's in the initial position of the word, the front of a word. So the word visit in Gullah would be was it, like vegetable would be vegetable. And so you see those consistent substitutions happening across the language. So today we had the chance to tackle Turner, and I wanted to summarize by just putting some words out there for who he was and how he set the groundwork for people like me to stand on his shoulders as scholars that can openly say we're studying a language. We're not studying broken English. We're studying a language that has grammar, structure, and syntax, and names of people and places and things and food that sound very different than the things that we hear on a daily basis. So he was revolutionary. He was a leader, as we saw. He led at the university level. He was an educator, higher ed scholar, a linguist. He was an advocate. For somebody to come to the Gullah Geechee corridor and go live on the islands of Guatemala and Edisto and Johns Island and live with the people and be with them, and then write a whole book to help advocate for a people who have something that's so unique. I don't know how much more of an advocate. He was an educator, and he was a trailblazer. Since Turner, people like me have come along, but I wanted to kind of outline like some of the major players who've done a lot of work to continue his trajectory of documentation of the linguistic structures of Gullah. You have Cunningham in 1970, Patricia Causey Nichols started publishing in 1976, Mary Twining in 1977, Patricia Jones Jackson in 1978, Catherine Wiley Mill in 1990, Demetra Hopkins in 1992, my mentor, Dr. Tracy L. Weldon in 1998, Dr. Salakoko Mafwani is still publishing today. Several articles. I actually was just reading one of his newer ones here recently. He's amazing. And then me, 2017, the first article published with Gullah Geechee children as the subjects, talking about their dialect and similarities to Turner's work. All of my work was comparing modern Gullah to Turner's work. And I spent a lot of time diving into Turner's work because I was fascinated by the fact that he was so meticulous. And I wanted to show that our kids are still using the same forms that Turner encountered on the islands and so meticulously documented for us to still have as a reference today. So I hope that you will join me as we continue on the series. If you haven't registered, please go online and register. We will be back July 14th, 28th, and August 4th. In the next session, we're going to dive into some of those persistent, unique Creole linguistic structures of the Gullah language and kind of discuss the trajectory of their current use and continued existence. So I'm going to dive into some of those other scholars that I mentioned, their works, and look at what they're showing as persistent linguistic patterns of Gullah. In the session 3, we're going to talk about Gullah Geechee extinction. There's actually an article out there called Gullah Geechee Isn't Dead Yet. So we're going to look at that article and kind of talk about the stance he took and then how we can kind of combat that. And session 4, what we can do, we're really going to go into like the final conversation, summarizing all of this scholarship, but really talking about what is a viable strategic linguistic preservation pathway that we can develop to educate ourselves about Gullah, to share the words out to the world, to help continue the work of preservation. So I hope you'll join me. Stay connected. Here's my email address. If you're on social media, you can find me at Hey Jessica Berry on Instagram. I'm also at the Geechee Scholar. And most recently, you can also find me at the Okra Soup Foundation, my new 501c3 nonprofit for the churn, because I think it's important that we do this for the children. So I have enjoyed my time with you all today. And with that, I will turn it back. Oh, well, let me not say that. I'm not sure if I'm turning it back over to Angel or we want to take questions.
Dr. Berry, we can go ahead and take questions. If anyone has any questions, we can go ahead and do that. We put the session till 7:15 to give some time. And so I do see a hand, Mr. Dennis Lloyd. Feel free to jump in.
I guess because Dennis invited me, it says Dennis Lloyd, but I'm not Dennis Lloyd.
Bill Bellinger.
My name's Dr. Robert Bellinger.
Robert Bellinger.
And in the interest of, how are you? I thank you very much for your presentation. I have a lot I wanted to say, but I'll limit it because of time.
Okay.
I'm a come yeah, but my family's a been yeah.
Okay.
My cousin Mamie, Mamie Field, she went to Claflin, graduated with her teaching license in 1908, taught on Johns Island, and then also on James Island. But she was in Turner's book. In the very beginning of acknowledgments, he acknowledges her because she was one of the people who served as an interpreter for him when he went out to Johns Island.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And last week, I was talking with my adopted daughter, who is from Senegal, but her family came to Senegal from Mali. They're from a group called the Turka. And I was talking to her and I mentioned Benny. And she said, "What? Benny?" She said, "That's what my family calls it, sesame." And she said, "Wow, that's what my family calls it. How do you know that?" And so I was telling her about Gullah Geechee. And also, there are a lot of similarities I found between the Sea Islands and some of the islands off the coast of Senegal, like Joal, where President Leopold Senghor was from, in the fact that they eat rice every day, they love okra, they use the same kind of fishing nets, the small boats, the guinea hen, et cetera, et cetera. We can go on, but I'll stop there. So thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing. And I'm so glad you talked about all of those similarities because, I just wish we could all go and see. I don't know. I want to go. I want to experience it because I hear people talk about it and I'm just like, I want to go and see it for myself. So that's an aspiration of mine. And thank you for sharing. I would love to have a conversation with, you said it was your niece from Senegal?
My adopted daughter.
Adopted daughter. I would love to talk to her.
Yeah.
I want to hear it. So
I was just in South Carolina last week.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing.
Hello, my name is Dennis Lloyd, and I know Dr. Bellinger, who I invited, and we met through the Slave Legacy History Coalition, and I must say that first of all, I enjoyed your presentation. My wife and I were down in Sapelo Island a few months back, and which is a Gullah Geechee island, and certainly quite a bit of history. So we are planning to have a segment, and I say we, Dr. Bellinger, who you just talked, myself, we are going to have a session on Gullah Geechee, if not one, maybe two. And certainly would like to be in touch with you to have you present some of your information at these. We have monthly virtual meetings with a Slave Legacy History Coalition, which is primarily based around the Harvard, Cambridge, Boston area, and beyond. But again, your presentation was very strong. I put my contact information in your chat, and hopefully we'll look forward to speaking with you.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll grab that right now.
Hi, my name is Lori Briere. Hello,
Lori.
I am actually from Port Royal, South Carolina. Heavy Gullah Geechee. I'm super excited to see this happening. There have been so few people that actually understand or recognize who we are or what we're about. And one of the things that people try to do is they try to get the language out of you, especially in school. But I had the fortune of being part of a military family. So that meant we spent every summer in South Carolina. So I recognized very early on that they're not, they're definitely a separate and different language. Of course, everyone made fun of us when we came. We're the weird cousins that sound funny from out of town because, our Gullah was kind of crappy. The other thing is, I actually work at Clemson University, and I actually had the pleasure of getting a whole lot of people from Johns Island registered over the last several weeks because the government is now actually investing in the preservation of this culture. And so I am super excited about it. Lots of grant money kind of going out. I think a couple of people on this call might have had to sign up or are very frustrated with the process, but I am so excited to see that not just people like you, and I'm super proud. I don't even know if you're proud of you, but also that other investments are being made to preserve our culture. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Hey, Tony Parker, granddaughter.
Hi, I sent you a little message. How you doing?
I'm good. Good to see you.
It's good to see you as well.
So-
I have not been home in it's been several weeks. The last time I was there, I laid my grandmother to rest. So good to see you, and thank you for what you're doing also, Anita. You are amazing. Being all the way in California and turning on the TV and seeing Miss Nina Prather on there is awesome. My family has a very long history where we're in our hometown, where we're from. Everyone knows us, and we are big time Gullah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And I'm
Thank you
so
so
proud
much.
of you, Jessica. So proud of you. Proud of you. Proud of you.
Thank you so much. That's so,
Oh,
that does my heart good. I really appreciate it.
yeah. Angel and Victoria, y'all make me proud.
We love you, Miss Anita. And if y'all don't know Miss Anita Singleton Prather, aka Aunt Pearly Sue,
Aunt Pearly Sue,
just
child.
Google, honey, and you will be able to see her wonderful work and really catch her in person all across the Gullah Geechee corridor, preserving our story. So we are so grateful for you. And I want to read something in the chat from Miss Rosine Barber, who shared in the chat. I read it. I just think it's phenomenal to read it. So she said, I lived with my grandmother and aunties in 1954 through 1955, Savannah, Georgia. My mother's family was from South Carolina and Georgia. I heard all these words during my time in the early 50s. I was at the age of learning how to speak, ages 2 to 3.5. Came back to the Midwest at the age of 3.5, went to a pre-K4 program. Teachers complained about my word usage, saying I was speaking broken English. I grew up embarrassed about how I spoke, always asking my parents to get me in a speech class. Never happened. I'm still very shy about public speaking. I'm 71 years old now. This is very uplifting to me to know I was taught an African language and didn't know. Neither did my mom. I'm blessed. I'm so glad I stumbled upon this Zoom class. And we are so grateful that you stumbled upon this Zoom class because you were never speaking broken English, like Dr. Berry said. You were always speaking right, and you got it early on, which is the perfect time to get it. So thank you for being here, Ms. Rosine.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions or reflections?
I have a Gullah Geechee heritage book. Is there anyone who's a participant in this book here by any chance? I picked it up at Sapelo Island, I believe. It was
That's Golden Isles, yeah. That would be Georgia, based out of Georgia.
right, exactly.
St. Simon.
Saint, exactly. Well, actually Sapelo next to it. Right next to Saint. They're all connected. Yes, Saint Simon, yes.
Any Georgians?
No Georgians. All South Carolinians, huh? All
That's
right.
okay. That's all right.
That's all right. No, it's fine. It's
Yes,
beautiful.
but we do have that book on our shelves. We do have that book.
Mhm. I was wondering. Okay.
Well, if that is all, we are so grateful to Dr. Jessica Berry. And like she stated, we will be together again on July 14th. And this time we will be hybrid. So you will be able to join us virtually, but we will also be at the Avery Research Center at the College of Charleston. They'll be partnering with us so that we can host some in-person time so we can get Dr. Berry in person. So if you are in the area, please feel free to stop by. The time is the same, 6:00 p.m. And I have also put in the chat the past Gullah presentation from July 2022. That is Dr. Berry. And like she said, she gets a little more into the Gullah culture and into some of the food ways and a little more than just hitting on the history of the language. So we really wanted to tackle the history of the language, the origin. But if you want, just to get some information and maybe hear her speak a little more Gullah and just share some words and things of that nature, feel free to click that link. It will take you directly to the recording, no password required. And with that being said, we hope that you all have a great evening. And again, thank you so much, Dr. Berry, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.